Well, everyone, once again, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by I Love Growing Marijuana. Because when you need seeds for cannabis, or nutrients to grow that cannabis, or even a free grower's guide to download, click on the link in the show notes to get to ilovegrowingmarijuana.com. That way they know we sent you. And don't forget, right now they have a special on White Widow seeds that is buy 10 and get 10 for free. Also, don't forget that Delta Leaf Labs has the plant DNA sex testing kit that you need. If you follow me on Instagram at InMyGrow, I posted up a picture a few days ago of what those testing kits look like. So go over to deltaleaflabs.com and order your testing kits. And at checkout, use promo code IMGS10 for 10% off of that order. Alright everyone, let's start the show. So this is the In My Grow Show, the podcast dedicated to taking the mystery out of cannabis. I'm your host, Alex. I want to thank you all for showing up for episode number 44 of the show. And this is the show before Christmas 2018. I hope everyone got their shopping done. Not because I want you out there spending money, but because I don't want you out there at the mall right now. A bunch of crazy people are at the mall right now, or out at the store buying shit. Don't be part of those crazy people. You need to be a part of a whole different crowd of crazy people. The kind that stay home and bask in their procrastination for not getting everything. That's the kind you need to be. Now this episode, I'm going to recap the year 2018. Now why am I recapping it before Christmas and not the new year? And that's because on next week's show, I plan on talking to Sienna Marie and Cecilia from Mary Jane's Service Network. And we're going to talk about what businesses need to get their cannabis licenses out here in California and what might change come January 1, 2019. So I thought that was a good fit for the end of the year. I didn't want to, stack all this end of the year stuff on top of that interview. So that's why I'm doing it this week. But before I do the recap, I want to start off by thanking my buddy Rooster for all the help that he gave me with my logo. I had a couple of things I wanted to tweak on my logo, but I don't know anything about Photoshop or how to do that on the computer. My buddy Rooster was good enough to help me out with that. So thank you, brother, very much. I do appreciate that. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in my grow. I know I haven't talked about what I've got going on for a while. Lately the episodes have mostly been on other things besides growing. But right now in one of the cabinets I've got a Gorilla Glue, I've got an Orange Durban Poison, and I've got a male and a female of the Space Force. So the female Space Force and the Orange Durban Poison, they were about 2.5 feet tall. I went ahead and topped them. It took about 3 to 4 inches off the top, just so I can get them to grow fatter instead of taller. If you take the top branch off, that dominant branch right in the middle, the apical branch, when you cut that off, it makes the lower branches spread out. The plant basically says, well, we need another main branch, so all the other branches try the best they can to be that main next big branch. They want to be the dominant one, the apical branch. So that's why I did that, to make them, more bushier than taller. But the tops that I cut off, I'm going to go ahead and make clones out of. Now, I didn't want to get the Dewey Mister cloner out, because the only place I can set that up is outside because of the air pump. It just has this constant hum. And it would drive us nuts in the house if I put it anywhere in the house. And if I put it out back outside, the nighttime temperatures, they're mid to low 40s. So those cuttings would struggle so much to try and push out roots on top of being in survival mode in that kind of cold. So I just decided to take the cuttings, prepare them like I usually do for any clone, scrape off the outer layer, cut them at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to put them in a cup of water in the cabinet with the lights on all day and all night. I'm going to change the water every 2 to 3 days. And probably about 2 weeks, I should see some roots going on. So that'll be cool. The Gorilla Glue, I've never grown a Gorilla Glue. She's really stocky right now. She's really small and, bushy on her own. But even in veg, because right now that whole cabinet that they're in a vegetative cycle. Even in veg, that Gorilla Glue is just pushing out trichomes, man. This thing is just frosty looking and just sticky, and I'm amazed because I don't plan on switching the lights to a 12-12 cycle for another 2 weeks. So I'm really interested to see what that's gonna look like. I think I'm gonna have to stake her up though, because the branches, they're getting really full of like flowering sites, but they're really kind of flimsy. So I'm gonna have to stake her up a little bit. And now I was looking at the Durban Poison today, one of the ones that I had topped, and I might have gotten it wrong. She may be a male. I sprouted these seeds before I had gotten the testing kits from Delta Leaf Labs, so I didn't send them out. I just, eyeballed them. I'll get it right about 70-80% of the time. But yeah, taking a closer look at her today, I was like, you might be a boy. So we'll see in a couple of weeks when I switch the lights over. At least I won't be surprised. Now I want to talk about the 805 Cannabis Society gathering that I went to this past week. Once again, it was at the Third Window Brewery in Santa Barbara. Shout out to them for letting our group get together there. They're a really cool place. They were really nice to us. It was a smaller group than what was there last month. And that was by design. That's something the organizers, Felipe and Kristen, wanted. And I ran into Chelsea from Sespe Creek Collective, and she was telling me the story of when the collective got raided back in 2016, right before we voted on Prop 64. And she was just telling me on how she's still suing the police or the sheriff's department to get all of her inventory back. It's just a fucked up story, man. Maybe I should get her in here to tell us about that. That's a good idea. I also met up with Sienna Marie from Mary Jane Service Networks. They're going to be the ones I'm going to talk to next week about licensing, how to get it. Now, this one woman got up to speak from Bluebird Farms, and they were a cannabis farm out here in Santa Barbara County. And she started to talk about how the county's trying to roll back cannabis regulations, especially for growers. They're using this whole subject of hoop houses and how big they're allowed to be for commercial cannabis grows. Now, if you've never seen a hoop house, it's basically metal hoops that have plastic pulled over the top of them. They're a really efficient way to grow berries and tomatoes and cannabis. But the county's just trying to limit the size of them for commercial grows. And like I said, I'm really trying to get her on the show to talk about this because she has a lot more details than what I have right now about this. All in all, though, it was another really cool gathering of the 805 Cannabis Society. Next on the report from the Cannabis Frontline, I am going to continue to talk about the Farm Bill of 2018. And I'm still talking about this because the Farm Bill has a section in there about hemp and about legalizing hemp. And this week was a big deal for that because the president signed it into law, which means that law takes effect immediately, meaning the federal drug authorities must treat hemp like any other agricultural commodity, such as wheat or potatoes. Now, that law defines hemp as cannabis below 0.3% THC, and it takes it out of the Controlled Substance Act, which is a big deal, because that means that hemp farmers will face none of the business and regulatory obstacles that apply to higher THC varieties, such as the drug form of cannabis, which are all still defined as marijuana and remain a Schedule I drug. And I'm getting this information from something that was written up in the Marijuana Business Daily by Kristen Nichols. The bill also says that cannabis plants above 0.3% still are defined as Schedule I drugs, though licensed hemp producers can't be charged with a crime if their hemp exceeds the THC level, making it marijuana. What that basically means is that if I'm a licensed hemp producer and some of my crop comes in and it tests higher than 0.3% of THC, the federal government can't come down on me for growing what they consider to be Schedule I marijuana. It was a mistake. It came up as an anomaly. As long as I destroy it and don't try to sell it, I'm okay. At least that's what I get from it. It also goes on to say the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, must develop national hemp regulations as quickly as practical. which means they don't really have a timeline, just as fast as they can without rushing things, basically. The national plan must include procedures for checking hemp plants' THC content and plans to destroy plants with too much THC. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, retains authority over foods, drugs, and cosmetics. That means that while CBD becomes legal January 1, it doesn't mean it is legal to add hemp or hemp CBD to food products or dietary supplements. What I think they're saying there is that even though it's going to be legal January 1, you can't just go and willy-nilly add hemp and CBD to products. There's still going to be some oversight through the FDA. It goes on to say the law could open up channels for marijuana companies to access public markets and other financial tools unavailable to companies selling Schedule I drugs. Now, the two things in this bill that I see that are going to have a huge effect on the hemp industry is one, the shipping of products and raw material. As far as how I understand it with this new farm bill, in the past, a CBD oil producer in California couldn't buy their hemp from a hemp grower in Colorado because since hemp was still federally illegal, you couldn't transport that hemp across state lines. If I was a CBD oil producer in California, I had to get all of my hemp from California. This bill basically does away with that. If I'm a CBD oil producer in California, I can get my hemp from any state. And it also means that whatever product I make with CBD, I can ship anywhere in the country across state lines. Those states that I ship across can't stop my product from moving. They can put regulations on packaging and, how it's transported, but they can't stop it going across state lines. That's a huge deal also. The other thing is the banking. Giving companies access to banks, to credit cards, so they can do payrolls, so they don't have to have mounds of cash in their stores, is also going to help. Now, some notable sections of the Farm Bill, on section 10114, page 435, it says, "Nothing in the Act prohibits the interstate commerce of hemp, nor can states or tribes prohibit the transportation of hemp and hemp products through their territories. States and tribal governments may impose separate restrictions and requirements on hemp growth and sales of hemp products. However, they cannot interfere with the interstate transportation of hemp and hemp products." I like that. Another one, Title IX on page 439, hemp farmers are made eligible for crop insurance and marketability requirements for the crop insurance program to be waived. That's a big deal to be able to get crop insurance. Because before this, if something happened to your crop catastrophically, that was coming out of pocket. Also on page 738, it says, states and tribal governments are authorized to put more restrictive parameters on the production of hemp, but are not authorized to alter the definition of hemp or put in place policies that are less restrictive. And what I think that basically means is that local governments and municipalities can't really redefine hemp or make their regulations less rigid than the government's. And here we go, on page 739 it says, while states and Indian tribes may limit the production and sales of hemp and hemp products within their border, they are not allowed to limit the transportation or shipment of hemp or hemp products through the states or Indian territories. So there you go, folks. Those are just some of the highlights of the Farm Bill that the president has just signed and are immediately going into effect. But before you dive into the hemp industry, please talk to a lawyer. Please talk to someone who knows more about this than me. I am not a lawyer. Now I want to recap 2018. This year, which I got to tell you has been a true trip for me. Mostly because I started the podcast about this time last year. And I started it just after we got home from being evacuated from the Thomas fire. We were evacuated for like 6 days or something. We went and stayed with my brother. The really crazy thing was, in that whole thing of packing up the vehicles and getting the hell out of town, So I pack up my truck, I take some of the new recording equipment that I had bought to start the podcast, put that in my vehicle, drive out to my brother's house. I get to my brother's house, park my truck, and during the time while we're there, and like I said, it was like 6 or 7 days, my truck got broken into. The recording equipment was stolen, some clothes and jackets that I had in there were taken, and it just bummed me out. I started to just totally be in my head about it. Oh, is this a sign? Should I even start the podcast? All that shit. But, whatever. I shook it off, said fuck it, ordered some new equipment, and just, put the podcast out, man. And then like 3 weeks after I started it, the landslides in Montecito happened, which were just terrible and tragic. People lost their lives, a bunch of other people lost their homes. It was a crazy situation last winter, because literally it was like a month after the fires. And I want to take a moment again to thank the first responders for everything they did for my community, for everything they do for every community they go into. They do an awesome job under a lot of stress, man. So thank you if you're a first responder. I also want to thank volunteers, because volunteers, they're in communities way after the first responders leave. Volunteers are the ones that make sure that people are getting the things that they need, they're getting the help that they need, helping them get resources, man. I saw my community just pull together in an awesome way when tragedy struck, man. So thank you both to the first responders and to all the volunteers, because you guys really do help bring that community back. So thank you. The other group of people I want to thank are all those cannabis warriors and cannabis activists who are out there. If you showed up to vote for cannabis, if you showed up to a city council meeting to talk in a positive way about cannabis, I'm talking about you. I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing. Because of you, this conversation, this narrative of what cannabis is and what a cannabis user is totally changing. There's still a lot of work to be done out there. There are still a lot of minds to change. And if you're in one of those states or in one of those places where cannabis legislation or cannabis regulation failed, dust yourself off. Don't give up. We'll help you fight for change. Reach out to other places where change has happened, and see how they did it. See if we need to have the conversation differently. Some communities care about child safety. Other communities care about, the criminal element. But it's all about finding that middle ground with people and showing them that it's not what they were told it once was. So, like I said, I want to thank all of those cannabis warriors who are out there. So now I want to talk about some of the podcasts that I listened to this year. I do construction work. I specialize in fire suppression systems. Think of fire sprinkler systems. So there's a good portion of most of my days where I can just put in headphones and do my work because it's so monotonous. And I fill up a lot of those hours either listening to podcasts or listening to books on tape, listening to audiobooks, books on tape. Who the fuck uses tape anymore? Listening to audiobooks. So yeah, first I want to start with the list of podcasts that I listen to. At the very top, I got to give it up to Joe Rogan. His podcast is called The Joe Rogan Experience. I love that show. If you've never heard it before, he is not the meathead you would think he is. His guests will vary from MMA fighters to nuclear physicists. And the guy is really smart too. And just so you know, most of his episodes will run anywhere from 2 hours to 3.5 hours. But they're great to listen to, man. So if you get a chance, when you get some time, you should really listen to him. The next one I want to talk about is the Dude Grows Show, and that's hosted by the Dude and Scotty. That's a really good cannabis podcast. A lot of really good grow knowledge is talked about on that show. They got Guru over there and all of the DGC, and they're just really fun to listen to. And they really do have a lot of grow knowledge in cannabis. Another podcast I really like is Hardcore History, and that's hosted by Dan Carlin. I love that guy's show. An episode comes out like once every 6 weeks, once every 2 months, and it's all about, moments in history, and they're usually about 3 to 4 hours. But I love the way that guy presents it, man. First of all, he talks really low, like he's telling you a secret. And then he's real, passionate and into it, and he's done his research. It's just a really good podcast. It's called Hardcore History. Now, I've got to mention the Grow From Your Heart podcast, and that's hosted by Rasta Jeff. Again, another really good cannabis podcast. Rasta Jeff is like this deep well of grow knowledge. So absolutely go check out his podcast. It's called Grow From Your Heart. Now, a show I discovered recently is called The Dream. It's kind of like a financial show, but they do a seasons type of format. Like, they'll put out 11 episodes, but all of the episodes will have a theme, a season. Like the one I was listening to was about multi-level marketing, the MLMs. Think of Mary Kay and Amway. And it was really interesting, man. I thought it was really interesting. And that's called The Dream. I don't know, I forget the names of the people who host it. There's like 3 or 4 of them. But go check it out, it's really good. Another cannabis podcast that's also really good is the Shaping Fire podcast, and that's hosted by Shango Los. It mostly talks about the business side of cannabis. Also a really good podcast, a lot of great information up there. Go check it out, it's called Shaping Fire. And last on my list is the Smodcast, and that is hosted by Kevin Smith, the director from Clerks. He's got like 3 or 4 podcasts, I think, but the one I like to listen to is called the Smodcast. It's pretty funny, man. I get a kick out of it. So if you like that guy, go check out his podcast. A couple other ones that didn't make the list, I didn't write down. One was Pat Flynn's podcast. I forget what his is called. Holy crap. But anyways, Pat Flynn, go find him. Also, it's like a business podcast. Gary Vaynerchuk's podcast also. He's got like 3 or 4 up. Any of his are really good. Also, again, both Gary Vaynerchuk and Pat Flynn, they're a business, like motivational type of podcast. And Tad Hussey. Tad Hussey has a great cannabis growing podcast. It's also like a gardening podcast. I forget the name of that one also, but the guy's name is Tad Hussey. I think it's called something like Cultural and Science Podcast for Cannabis, something like that. Just Google Tad Hussey. Next, I want to talk about just some of the books that I read this year. I didn't really read them. Like I said, I have a lot of headphone time in my day. I listen to audiobooks. Let's start off with the Gulag Archipelago, written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this book is about the labor camps that the Russians put up right after World War II to kind of enforce communism. It's just gnarly the way they worked, man, those labor camps. But the Gulag Archipelagos, man, if you want something nice and depressing to read, that's the one you go to. Another one that I read that was really good was Coyote America, which was written by Dan Flores. And it gives like the history of coyotes. And I really enjoyed it. It made me a fan of coyotes. You should go check it out, man. It was really cool. Now, if you want to read about the soil food web, go find the book called Teeming with Microbes by Jeff Lowenfeld. And that book will really help you understand, like I said, the soil food web. It's a little wordy, a little technical, but you're smart enough. You can figure it out and get through it. It's a great book to fall asleep to. Put it in the headphones, put the audiobook on, and Lowenfeld will just read you to sleep. Another book I really think you should check out is Smoke Signal. And that'll give you like a history of cannabis, of marijuana, and a little bit of the history of the war on drugs. That's a really good book, man. And last but not least, on the list of books for this year, if you know me, you know that I'm a fan of Blade Runner, the movie. The director's cut, not the bullshit theatrical cut that was in the movie theater. But I'm a huge fan of that movie. But I've never read the book that it was written after, and that is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was written by Philip K. Dick. And I really like the book, and I really like the movie, but both of them have very little in common. There's maybe like 2 themes in the book, in the book that the movie carries over to, but other than that, completely different. But I liked it, and I'm a huge fan of sci-fi also. And that's just a short list of some of the books that I read this year. Alright, now we're going to do a strain of the week, but we're going to do the top 10 of 2018 for the show. Coming in at number 10, we've got Bubblegum. And I just featured it not too long ago on the show, but let's recap. It was developed in Indiana. From there, it was taken to Holland, where it was, tightened up and turned into the bubblegum that we love now. Now, at number 9, it is the LA Confidential. Like the LA Confidential, nice, well-rounded, got me high but calm at the same time. And I really liked it because it made my eyeballs feel tingly, like behind them. I like that feeling. At number 8, we've got the White Widow. Now, you know I love a White Widow. I love to smoke a White Widow anyways. I can't grow a White Widow. We don't get along. You'll hear me say this often. But I do love that White Widow, man. And at number 7, we have the ever-powerful Sour Diesel, which is a cross between the ChemDog 91 and the Super Skunk. Great strain. Many other good strains have come from this Sour Diesel. But Sour Diesel will always be a contender in my mind. Does the Sour Diesel make Alex's top 10? That's a good question. I don't know. I'm still working on that list. Like my all-time top 10, not just the years. All right. Moving on to number 6, I'm going to give it to Headband. Once again, been a favorite of mine for a long time, I think, and it really does feel like you have a headband on when you smoke this. And of course, Headband is a cross between the OG Kush and the Sour Diesel. Oh no, check that out, man, told you. Coming in at number 5 is the Third Dimension, the 3D, and which is a cross of the Apollo 13 Jack Cleaners and the Space Queen. And you heard me and Subcool talk about it a few weeks back, because Subcool is the one, TGA Genetics, who came up with it. But the Third Dimension, you can still find seeds for them. They're out there. It's a good strain. All right, now at number 4, I'm going to give it up to the Gorilla Glue number 4. Wow, that just worked out that way. I didn't plan that. Now, the Gorilla Glue number 4 is kind of a mutant of the original glue. Okay, now the original glue is a cross between the Sour Diesel, the Sour Dub, Chem Sisters, and Chocolate Diesel. But the Gorilla Glue was an accidental pollination of a hermaphrodite. And that's why growers always checked for pollen sacs when they're growing the Gorilla Glue number 4, because she does have a tendency, even with feminized seeds, to put out pollen sacs and just pollinate everything. So if you're growing the Gorilla Glue number 4, like myself, you're going to have to keep an eye out for pollen sacs, as I'm going to do myself. Now at number 3, I've got to give it up to the Orange Durban Poison. As it is, the Durban Poison is an African landrace. It was crossed with the Orange Juice Bud, but this thing is a beautiful hitter with a great high. I enjoy it. If it's out there, if I see it, I will go out and find the Orange Durban Poison. At number 2, I need to give it up to the Cherry AK-47. Okay, now first let's talk about the AK-47, because just by itself, the AK-47 is one of my favorite strains of all time. Yes, the AK does make my top 10. And the AK-47 is a cross between Colombian, Mexican, Thai, and Afghani varieties. And the Cherry AK-47 is, again, just one of those mutants that came out of a bunch of other AK-47s. This one just had this trait, and it is a beautiful fucking flower. Alright, now at number 1, I'm going to give it up to Jack Herer. And Jack Herer, as it is, makes my personal top 10 anyways. And the crazy thing is, I've got some Jack Herer right now that I'm smoking that is fucking amazing. The high is stellar because it keeps me super focused and energized, but it's a heavy hitter though. That Jack will hit you, pow! Holy cow, what the hell? Now the Jack Herer is a cross of the Northern Lights number 5 and the Shiva Skunk. So brothers and sisters, that is the top 10 strains for the show for 2018. Well, mis amigos, my friends, we've reached the end of the show. On the next episode, I'm going to talk to Sienna Marie and Cecilia from Mary Jane Services Network. So join me for that. That's going to be our last show for 2018. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. For all of the rest of you, Happy Holidays. Even if you're not religious, do me a favor, just enjoy the time that you're going to have with your loved ones. Don't worry about buying shit. Just enjoy the time you're with them. That's it, man. Real easy. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, send me an email. That is inmygrow@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram at inmygrow. Now don't forget, if this podcast has educated you, entertained you, or even given you a little bit of escape from your day, throw a couple of bucks our way and help the show out financially. You can go to patreon.com/inmygrowshow and make a donation, or you can go to inmygrow.com, look for the tab that says support the show, and order a t-shirt. Or even easier, click on the Amazon link in the show notes, and that'll help drive commission from sales on Amazon to the show. It doesn't cost you anything, you just hit the link, and that just lets Amazon know that we sent you. But if you can't support the show financially, don't worry about it. Subscribe to the show, subscribe to the podcast, and tell 3 other people about the show. Real easy. And while I'm on the subject, everybody else, do me a favor, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it. That way you can get email notifications of when new content comes up, instead of just waiting for a social media notification. And if you have a cannabis business that wants to advertise your products or services, or have me review your product, send me an email. That is inmygrow@gmail.com. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm going to get on out of here. I love you all very much. And don't forget to always grow, learn, and teach.